Hey everyone, and welcome back. Get comfy, grab your favorite blanket, maybe light a candle, because tonight we're diving into one of the most complicated, heartbreaking, and honestly mind-bending family mysteries I've ever researched. This is the story of the Carman family. And when I tell you this case has everything: wealth, tragedy, autism, misunderstanding, suspicious deaths at sea, a $42 million inheritance, accusations of double murder, and an ending that left everyone with more questions than answers. I mean it. Netflix just dropped a documentary about this case called The Carman Family Deaths, and it's sitting at #1 right now for a reason. Because this isn't just a true crime story. This is a modern Greek tragedy that tore apart one of New England's wealthiest families and left investigators, lawyers, and the public completely divided on what actually happened. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why some people are absolutely convinced that Nathan Carman, a young man diagnosed with autism, murdered both his grandfather and his mother to inherit millions. And you're also going to understand why others, including his own father, believe he was completely innocent and that law enforcement targeted him because they didn't understand his disability. There's no clear answer here. No confession. No smoking gun. Just a web of circumstantial evidence, family dysfunction, and two people who are gone forever. So let's start at the very beginning, with the man whose fortune started it all. Our story begins with John Chocolos, and honestly, this man lived the American dream. Born on June 26, 1926, in Keene, New Hampshire, John was the only son among 6 children. His parents, Charles Costas and Calliope Chocolos, were Greek immigrants who worked incredibly hard to give their family a better life. They eventually settled in Middletown, Connecticut, where John grew up surrounded by his 5 adoring sisters. In Middletown, John met the love of his life, a woman named Rita Baranowski. The two married and would stay together for nearly 59 years. Can you even imagine? Almost 6 decades of marriage. They had 4 daughters together: Elaine, Linda, Charlene, and Valerie. Now, John wasn't content to just coast through life. In the 1960s, he started building a career in real estate development, and he had a very specific niche: retirement communities, nursing homes, and extended care facilities across New England. And you know what? He was really, really good at it. John built an empire. He named his properties after his daughters. There was Linda Manor Extended Care Facility in Massachusetts, Charlene Manor in Greenfield. It was his way of honoring his family while building generational wealth. By the time we get to 2013, John Chocolos's estate is worth over $42 million. $42 million. But John wasn't the type of wealthy person who flaunted it. By all accounts, he was generous, philanthropic, deeply involved in the Greek Orthodox Church, and he worked right up until his death at 87 years old. He never retired. That's the kind of work ethic we're talking about. John had 2 homes. One was a modest single-story house on Overlook Drive in Windsor, Connecticut. Nothing flashy. But he also had this absolutely massive estate in West Chesterfield, New Hampshire, over 15,000 square feet on 88 acres of land. And every Christmas, John would put on the most elaborate holiday light display you've ever seen. We're talking thousands of lights, decorations covering the entire property. He'd open the gates to the public and ask for food donations for local pantries. The community loved him. His daughters loved him. He was known as a pillar of society, a hard-working man who gave back. But beneath the surface, John's family life was complicated. According to people close to the family, John could be controlling, volatile, sometimes even violent. His relationship with his daughters, particularly Linda, was strained. He supported them financially, giving them monthly allowances from living trusts he'd set up, but there were tensions about how much control he had over their lives. Still, despite whatever dysfunction existed behind closed doors, John had one person in his life who he absolutely adored: his first male grandson, Nathan Carman. Let me tell you about Nathan. Nathan Carman was born on July 6, 1994, to Linda Carman and her husband Clark Carman. He was John Chacalos's first grandson, and from the moment Nathan was born, John treated him like gold. He was the golden child, the favored heir, the one who would carry on the family name. But Nathan's early life wasn't easy. When Nathan was still very young, his parents divorced. His father, Clark, moved to California, and Nathan stayed in Middletown, Connecticut with his mother Linda. So Nathan rarely saw his dad growing up, and his relationship with his mother was intense, complicated, sometimes loving, sometimes suffocating. At age 4, Nathan was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is now classified under the broader umbrella of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Now, this is going to be really important to understand as we go through this case, so let me explain. People with Asperger's or ASD often struggle with social interactions. They might have difficulty reading social cues, making eye contact, or expressing emotions in ways that neurotypical people expect. They might speak in ways that sound overly formal or robotic. They might fixate intensely on specific interests. They might need routines and get really upset when those routines are disrupted. None of that means someone with autism is violent. None of that means they're more likely to commit crimes. But it does mean they're often misunderstood, especially by law enforcement. Nathan struggled to make friends growing up. He was lonely, isolated. But he found comfort in routines, in planning, and in his relationship with his grandfather, John. John Chacalos absolutely doted on Nathan. He'd bring Nathan to his business meetings so Nathan could take notes for him. John was hard of hearing in his later years. He'd teach Nathan about real estate development. He bought Nathan a beautiful white Irish sport horse named Cruz. He gave Nathan access to a joint bank account with his mother Linda that had $400,000 in it. He bought Nathan a pickup truck. He set aside $150,000 for Nathan's college fund. John told people that Nathan reminded him of himself. That Nathan was going to follow in his footsteps and become a developer. Nathan idolized his grandfather. He visited him almost every single week. But Nathan's relationship with his mother was a different story. As Nathan got older, especially in high school, things between him and Linda became strained. Really strained. According to court documents and family accounts, Nathan would have intense tantrums. He once threw a plate of cookies at Linda because she'd burned them. Then, in 2010, something happened that completely changed Nathan. His beloved horse, Cruz, died of colic. Nathan was devastated. Absolutely devastated. This horse was his only friend, according to some accounts. And after Cruz died, Nathan just shut down. He stopped talking to his mother. He communicated with her only through handwritten notes. Linda let him sleep in an RV in her driveway because he demanded independence. And then Nathan started having what Linda described on a mental health message board as paranoid delusions and psychotic episodes. At school, Nathan called the vice principal Satan. He called the secretary an agent of the devil. He was espousing what Linda called religious idiocy. Linda was terrified. She thought there was more going on than just autism. She sought various interventions, therapy, medication, different programs. At one point, in 2011, Linda and Clark actually signed over Nathan's guardianship to a behavioral correction camp because they didn't know what else to do. Nathan was diagnosed with potential mood and psychotic disorders in 2011, on top of his autism diagnosis. He had a history of what doctors described as hostility and aggression. But here's the thing, when Nathan was around his grandfather, he was calm, focused, happy, even. John never saw that side of Nathan that Linda struggled with. To John, Nathan was his brilliant, detail-oriented grandson who was going to carry on his legacy. So you have this dynamic, a grandfather who adores his grandson and doesn't see any problems. A mother who's struggling to help her son and feels like she's losing him. And a young man caught in the middle, dealing with autism, potential mental health issues, grief, and family pressure. And then, everything changed on December 20th, 2013. Let me set the scene for you. It's late 2013, and the Chocolos family is grieving. On November 21, 2013, Rita Chocolos, John's wife of nearly 59 years, died after a long battle with cancer. The family is devastated. They've just lost their mother and grandmother. And John? John is heartbroken. After almost 6 decades with his soulmate, he's suddenly alone. The daughters start planning his life. They encourage him to stay in Connecticut instead of going back to the big New Hampshire estate. They're even planning to take him to look at apartments so he can be close to family. So John is spending more time at his modest house on Overlook Drive in Windsor, Connecticut. And according to family accounts, Nathan visited his grandfather frequently during this time. On the evening of December 19, 2013, Nathan had dinner with his grandfather. They spent time together. Nathan left around 8:30 p.m., according to his own account. He said goodbye to his grandfather and headed home. And according to Nathan, that was the last time he saw John Chocolos alive. But here's where things get murky. Because Nathan's timeline doesn't quite add up. A neighbor reported hearing a loud noise that night, described as a possible gunshot, but the timing of that noise doesn't match Nathan's story of when he left. There's this gap in Nathan's account. Hours where he can't explain where he was or what he was doing. Nathan says he got lost on the way home. That he was disoriented and arrived late to meet his mother somewhere. But investigators would later find that really suspicious. How do you get lost on a route you've driven dozens of times? The next morning, December 20th, 2013, Elaine Chocolos, John's eldest daughter, arrives at her father's house around 8 a.m. to check on him. Maybe it was part of her routine. Maybe she had a bad feeling. We don't know for sure. But when Elaine walks into her father's bedroom, she finds a scene that will haunt her forever. John Chocolos is dead in his bed. He's been shot 3 times, in the head and back. The medical examiner will later determine he was shot with a .223 caliber semi-automatic rifle. Here's what makes this even more chilling: there are no signs of forced entry. Nothing is stolen from the house. The doors were locked. Whoever killed John Chocolos, he knew them. He let them into his home. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was personal. This was someone John trusted. The Windsor Police Department immediately launches a homicide investigation. Detective Christopher McKee and his team start canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing family members, trying to piece together John's final hours. And pretty quickly, one name keeps coming up: Nathan Carman. Why? Well, let's look at what investigators discovered. Nathan was the last person to see John alive. That's confirmed by Nathan himself. But then there's this: just days before John's murder, Nathan had sent an email to his grandfather's trust and estate's attorney. And in that email, Nathan asked very specific questions about inheritance. Specifically, Nathan wanted to know who had to die first for Nathan to inherit money. If John died, how much would Nathan get? What if Linda died before John? What if Linda died after John? Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's weird, but maybe Nathan was just curious about his future finances. Maybe he was planning ahead. People with autism often like to understand systems and structures. Maybe this was just Nathan being detail-oriented. But investigators didn't see it that way. To them, this looked like someone planning a murder for inheritance. And then there's the gun. On November 11, 2013, just over a month before John was killed, Nathan purchased a 6-hour 7.16 patrol rifle. The caliber, .223. The exact same caliber used to kill John Chocolos. When police questioned Nathan about this, he said he'd forgotten he even bought it. Forgot. And then he claimed he'd lost the gun. Just lost it. Investigators also discovered that Nathan destroyed his computer's hard drive around the time of John's death. He also got rid of the GPS unit from his truck. When police searched Nathan's home, they found all of this evidence. Or rather, they found the absence of evidence. The missing hard drive. The missing GPS. The missing gun. Let me paint you a picture of what the prosecution's theory would eventually become. They believed Nathan went to his grandfather's house on the night of December 19th, had dinner with him, waited until John was asleep, shot him 3 times with the rifle he'd purchased, and then left. No forced entry needed because Nathan had access to the house. Nothing stolen because that wasn't the point. The point was the inheritance. After John's death, Nathan received $550,000 from various accounts and trusts. $550,000. And John's estate? Worth $42 million, set to be divided among his 4 daughters. When each daughter died, their share would go to their children. Nathan stood to inherit Linda's share, roughly $7 million, when she died. Here's what makes this so frustrating. The Windsor Police Department actually drafted an arrest warrant for Nathan in connection with John's murder. They had enough suspicion to write up the paperwork. But it was never signed. Never executed. Why? Because they didn't have probable cause. All the evidence was circumstantial. The gun was missing. There was no DNA at the scene linking Nathan. There were no witnesses. Nathan had an alibi for part of the evening, even though it had holes. Without concrete evidence, without that smoking gun, literally, the prosecutor didn't feel confident charging Nathan. So the case remained open. Unsolved. John Chacaloz's 3 surviving daughters, Elaine, Charlene, and Valerie, were left without justice. Without answers. And Nathan? Nathan used the $550,000 he inherited to buy a foreclosed home in Vermont. He moved out of Connecticut, away from his mother, and started renovating the property. He also bought a 31-foot fishing boat. He named it the Chicken Pox. And for the next 3 years, Nathan lived in Vermont, slowly burning through his inheritance money, working on his house, and going on occasional fishing trips. His relationship with his mother remained strained. They'd see each other. They'd go on fishing trips together. It was one of the few activities they still shared. But Linda felt like she was losing her son. According to one account, Linda even recorded a video message for Nathan during a particularly tense period when he wasn't speaking to her. In that message, she told him that she was not going to leave him her house when she died. That he wasn't in her will. She wanted to make that clear. Why? Maybe she was trying to protect herself. Maybe she had suspicions about her own father's death. Or maybe she was just exhausted from years of difficult mother-son dynamics and wanted Nathan to know he needed to be independent. We'll never know for sure. Because by September 2016, Nathan had blown through almost all of his inheritance money. The house renovations weren't going well. He was unemployed. He was running out of cash. And that's when he invited his mother on a fishing trip. Okay, so it's September 17, 2016. A Saturday evening. Nathan calls his mother Linda and asks if she wants to go on an overnight fishing trip. They'd done these trips before, fishing was one of the few ways they still connected. So Linda agrees. Linda tells her best friend, Sharon Hartstein, about the trip. She even sends Sharon a text with their float plan, where they'd be going, when they'd be back. Linda tells Sharon, if you don't hear from me by lunchtime tomorrow, call the authorities. At around 11 p.m. On September 17, Nathan and Linda leave from Ram Point Marina in South Kingstown, Rhode Island. They're on Nathan's boat, the Chicken Pox, a 31-foot fishing vessel. It's supposed to be a simple overnight trip. Just mother and son, out on the water, fishing under the stars. They're expected back by noon the next day. Noon comes and goes. Linda doesn't call Sharon. Sharon tries calling Linda. No answer. She tries again. Nothing. By afternoon, Sharon is worried. She contacts the Coast Guard and reports the boat missing. The U.S. Coast Guard launches one of the most extensive search and rescue operations you can imagine. We're talking 62,000 nautical square miles, an area larger than the entire state of Georgia. Helicopters, planes, boats, everything. For 6 days, they search. Nothing. No boat. No debris. No life raft. No bodies. Nothing. On September 24th, after 6 days of searching, the Coast Guard makes the difficult decision to call off the rescue mission. They found absolutely nothing. Linda and Nathan are presumed lost at sea. The family holds a vigil for Linda. They mourn. They cry. They try to process the unthinkable, that Linda is gone. And then, the very next day, September 25th, 2016, a Chinese cargo ship called the Orient Lucky is traveling through the Atlantic Ocean, about 100 nautical miles south of Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Someone on the crew spots something in the water. It's a person. In an inflatable life raft. It's Nathan Carman. He's been floating in the Atlantic Ocean for 8 days. The crew throws him a life preserver. According to reports, Nathan's life raft is actually sinking as they reach him. He has to swim to the life preserver and they pull him aboard. Now, here's what you'd expect after someone spends 8 days adrift at sea: severe dehydration, hypothermia, sunburn, weakness, confusion. They'd barely be able to move, right? But according to the captain of the Orient Lucky and the Coast Guard officials who examined Nathan when he arrived in Boston, he seemed remarkably healthy. He climbed the ladder up to the ship with ease. No signs of severe dehydration. No hypothermia. He was coherent, calm, matter-of-fact. The Coast Guard investigator, FBI Special Agent Lisa Tutty, would later say this in the documentary: after 8 days at sea, Nathan should have been stumbling, weak, barely able to function. But he climbed that ladder with ease. When Nathan arrives in Boston on September 27, 2016, news crews are waiting. This is a miracle story, right? Man survives 8 days lost at sea. But something about Nathan's demeanor immediately strikes people as odd. He's calm. Almost expressionless. When he talks about his mother being missing, presumably dead, he doesn't cry. He doesn't break down. He speaks in this very measured, monotone way, describing the technical details of what happened. Reporters ask him, "What happened out there?" Nathan explains, "Around 11 p.m. About 12 hours after they left the marina, he heard a funny noise coming from the engine compartment. He went to investigate and saw water pouring into the boat. Just pouring in. He says the boat started sinking fast. Really fast. Within minutes. Nathan says he grabbed 3 bags, food supplies, flares, life jackets, and tried to get to the life raft. He looked for his mother. She had been in the cockpit. But when he looked back, she was gone. He says he called out for her. Mom. Mom. Over and over. He blew a whistle, 3 short bursts, which is a distress signal. He searched the water around him. Nothing. Linda was just gone. Nathan says he assumed that if his mother had been conscious and on the surface of the water, she would have called back to him. But she didn't. So he doesn't know what happened to her. And then Nathan floated in his life raft for 8 days, rationing his emergency food, staying hydrated, keeping watch for rescue vessels, until the Orient Lucky found him. That's his story. Now, to Nathan's father, Clark Carman, this makes perfect sense. Clark flies in from California immediately after Nathan is rescued. And Clark is adamant, his son did not kill Linda. In the Netflix documentary, Clark says, because of his autism, because of his ability to be alone, Nathan, of any individual that I know, could have coped with being lost at sea. And I'm sure he used all his ingenuity in those 8 days. Clark calls his wife's death a severe accident. He says, I know if Nathan had the ability, he would have saved his mother. But investigators? They're not buying it. Because when they start looking into the details, nothing adds up. When police searched Nathan's truck back at the marina, they found a bucket full of eels. Eels are common bait for striped bass fishing. But if the bait is still in your truck, what were you using for bait on the boat? Were you even planning to fish? Coast Guard Special Agent Eric Jemp points this out in the documentary. It makes no sense. Multiple eyewitnesses at the Ram Point Marina saw Nathan working on his boat the day before the trip. Specifically, they saw him drilling holes and removing trim tabs from the hull. Now, trim tabs help stabilize a boat and keep water out. Why would you remove them right before going on an overnight fishing trip? Unless you wanted the boat to sink. The insurance company that eventually investigated Nathan's $85,000 insurance claim for the boat hired experts who determined that Nathan's modifications would have made the boat significantly less seaworthy. They would have created vulnerabilities that could cause the boat to take on water and sink. This is huge. When Nathan realized the boat was taking on water, he never placed a distress call on his radio. Never. The Coast Guard has very specific protocols. If your vessel is in distress, you call for help immediately. Nathan had a working radio, but he didn't use it. When asked why, Nathan says he was too busy trying to save the boat and find his mother. But investigators point out, a distress call takes seconds. You grab the radio, hit the button, say Mayday, 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 and give your coordinates. It's automatic. It's what every boater is trained to do. Nathan didn't do it. When the boat started taking on water, Linda wasn't wearing a life vest. Nathan was, but Linda wasn't. When investigators asked Nathan about this, his answer was bizarre. He said, "I needed to keep my mom occupied while I'm trying to fix the problem." He needed to keep her occupied? So he asked her to bring in the fishing lines instead of putting on a life vest? That makes no sense. If your boat is sinking, the first thing you do is make sure everyone is wearing a life vest. That's basic safety. But Nathan says he prioritized keeping his mother busy over keeping her safe. An oceanographer was brought in to analyze Nathan's account. Nathan claimed he drifted east from where the boat sank. But according to the expert, the water currents at that time would have pushed a life raft west, not east. Nathan's story doesn't match the science. In the weeks before the fishing trip, Nathan purchased an anchor that was completely incompatible with his boat. It wouldn't work properly. He also bought lengths of heavy chain. Why? Prosecutors theorize, to weigh down a body so it wouldn't float. 2 weeks after Nathan was rescued, while the search for his mother was still ongoing, Nathan filed an $85,000 insurance claim for his lost boat. 2 weeks. His mother is missing. Presumed dead. And he's filing paperwork for insurance money. The insurance company fought the claim and eventually won, arguing that Nathan's modifications to the boat either directly or indirectly caused it to sink. They refused to pay. But the fact that Nathan filed so quickly raised eyebrows. It looked calculated. When South Kingstown Deputy Police Chief Alfred Buccio and his team searched Nathan's Vermont house, they found what they described as concerning documents. One document was titled, "Why I am reluctant to cooperate further with the police." Think about that. Before the fishing trip even happened, Nathan had already written a document explaining why he wouldn't cooperate with police. That's premeditation. That's planning for an investigation that hasn't happened yet. So you add all of this up, and prosecutors start to see a pattern. A scheme. A plan. They believe Nathan deliberately sabotaged his boat so it would sink. Lured his mother on a fishing trip under false pretenses. Killed his mother at sea, possibly weighing her body down with the anchor and chains. Created a survivable situation for himself with the life raft and supplies. Planned to report it all as a tragic accident. Why? The inheritance. When John Shakalos died in 2013, his $42 million estate was divided among his 4 daughters in a trust structure. Linda's share was roughly $10.5 million. But Linda didn't have direct access to that money. It was controlled by trustees, and there were rules about distribution. If Linda died, her share would pass to her son, Nathan. $7 million. That's what Nathan stood to inherit if his mother died. But here's the problem: Linda had written him out of her will. She'd told him in that video message that he wasn't getting her house. She had a gambling problem and financial issues of her own. It's possible she was planning to structure things so Nathan wouldn't inherit. If that happened, Nathan wouldn't see a dime of the family fortune. So the prosecution's theory became, Nathan killed his grandfather in 2013 to get $550,000 and started the inheritance flowing. When he burned through that money by 2016, he killed his mother to access her $7 million share. 2 murders. Both staged to look like accidents or unsolved crimes. All for money. But wait. There's another side to this story. And it's important. Nathan's defense team, and his father Clark, argue that investigators got everything wrong because they didn't understand autism. Elizabeth Kelly, an autism specialist attorney featured in the documentary, explains that autistic people are frequently misunderstood by law enforcement. Their responses can sound cold and calculating when they're actually just processing information differently. John Elder Robison, another autism expert who describes himself as autistic, says that Nathan's detailed planning, the emails about inheritance, the documents, the technical preparations, are all consistent with autism. He says, people who aren't autistic see detailed planning and think this person is plotting something sinister. But for autistic people, planning is just how they process the world. It's how they cope with uncertainty. Robison argues, they think we're up to something, but we're just trying to understand systems and be prepared. The expressionless face? The monotone voice? The lack of visible emotion when Nathan talked about his mother? All consistent with autism. Many people on the spectrum struggle to express emotions in ways that neurotypical people expect. That doesn't mean they don't feel those emotions. Nathan's calm demeanor after 8 days at sea? His father Clark says that's actually exactly what you'd expect from Nathan. He was detail-oriented, capable, good at survival situations. His autism meant he could cope with isolation better than most people. The fact that Nathan didn't call for help on the radio? His lawyer argues maybe he just panicked, made a mistake in the chaos. Not everyone responds perfectly in an emergency. As for the boat modifications? Nathan told investigators he was trying to fix things, to maintain the boat. The removed trim tabs, the drilling, maybe that was all just Nathan trying to make repairs and not understanding the maritime consequences. The inheritance emails? Maybe Nathan was just genuinely curious about financial planning. People with autism often like to understand exactly how things work, including trust structures and inheritance rules. So you can see how this becomes really complicated. Because on one hand, you have all this circumstantial evidence that looks really bad. But on the other hand, you have explanations for almost every piece of it if you understand autism. And here's the thing, Nathan was never able to defend himself in court. On May 10, 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice finally charged Nathan Carman with 8 counts, including first-degree murder on the high seas, Linda's death, 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of mail fraud. The indictment alleged that Nathan killed both his grandfather in 2013 and his mother in 2016 as part of a scheme to defraud the estate. Nathan pleaded not guilty to all charges. His trial was scheduled for October 2023. It would have been the moment when all of this evidence would finally be presented in court, where Nathan could tell his side of the story under oath, where a jury could decide, murder or tragic accidents. But on June 15, 2023, just months before his trial, at around 2:30 a.m., correctional officers at the Cheshire County Jail in Keene, New Hampshire found Nathan Carman unresponsive in his cell. He was 29 years old. They performed CPR for 40 minutes. But Nathan couldn't be revived. An autopsy determined his death was not suspicious. According to his defense attorneys, Nathan left a note, but its contents have never been made public. Nathan Carman died by suicide. All charges were dropped. The case is closed, technically. But it's not really closed, is it? John Chacalos's murder remains officially unsolved. Linda Carman's body was never recovered. And Nathan took whatever truth he knew to his grave. So here's where we land. What do I think happened? Honestly? I don't know. And I don't think anyone can know for sure. The circumstantial evidence against Nathan is overwhelming. The inheritance motive, the boat modifications, the missing gun, the destroyed hard drive, the emails, the timeline inconsistencies, it all looks really, really bad. But I also know that people with autism are disproportionately accused of crimes they didn't commit because law enforcement misinterprets their behavior. I know that Nathan's calm demeanor and odd responses could be fully explained by his diagnosis. I know that a lack of emotion doesn't equal guilt. What I do know is this: 2 people are dead. A family is destroyed. And whatever the truth is, it's heartbreaking. Nathan's father Clark lost his wife and his son. John's 3 surviving daughters lost their father and their sister. Nathan lost his grandfather, his mother, and eventually his own life. If Nathan did kill his grandfather and mother, then he's a calculating murderer who manipulated his family and staged elaborate crimes for money. If Nathan was innocent, then he's a victim of a justice system that didn't understand his disability and spent years being accused of murdering the 2 people he loved most in the world, eventually driving him to take his own life. We'll never know which story is true. Netflix's The Carman Family Deaths is now streaming, and I highly recommend watching it. The documentary does an incredible job presenting both sides and letting you draw your own conclusions. What do you think? Do you think Nathan was guilty? Or do you think he was innocent and tragically misunderstood? Let me know in the comments. And if this case affected you emotionally, please take care of yourself tonight. This is a heavy one. Thanks for listening. Sleep well. Story 2. Hey friends, get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights, settle into your pillows, because tonight we're going to talk about one of the most haunting and mysterious cases of the 2010s. This is the story of Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old college student who vanished from one of Los Angeles' most notorious hotels. And when her body was finally discovered 19 days later, she was found floating in a water tank on the roof. But here's what makes this case so captivating. Before Elisa disappeared, she was caught on elevator security footage behaving in a way that's, honestly, it's unsettling. The video went viral. Millions of people watched it. And everyone had a theory. Was she being followed? Was she having a mental health crisis? Was something paranormal happening in that elevator? Or was there a more sinister explanation? Tonight, we're going to walk through everything. The history of the Cecil Hotel, which, trust me, is dark. Elisa's life and her struggles with mental illness. That infamous elevator footage. The search. The discovery. And ultimately, what investigators believe really happened. So take a deep breath. Let's begin. Before we talk about Elisa, we need to talk about the hotel where she stayed. Because the Cecil Hotel isn't just any hotel. This place has a reputation. The Cecil Hotel opened its doors in 1927 in downtown Los Angeles, right at the edge of an area that would eventually become known as Skid Row. When it first opened, the Cecil was actually beautiful: 700 rooms, 19 floors, marble lobby, gorgeous architecture. It was meant to be a respectable hotel for business travelers and tourists. But then the Great Depression hit. And the neighborhood around the Cecil started to decline. Badly. By the 1950s and 60s, Skid Row had become one of the most impoverished areas in Los Angeles. Drug dealing, prostitution, homelessness, violence, all of it concentrated in this 56-block area. And the Cecil Hotel sat right in the middle of it. The hotel's clientele changed. Instead of tourists, it became home to transients, people struggling with addiction, people dealing with mental illness. The rooms were cheap, sometimes as low as $14 a night. The Cecil essentially became a form of low-income housing. And with that shift came tragedy. So much tragedy. Over the decades, the Cecil Hotel became known for death. Suicides, murders, overdoses, the hotel saw it all. Let me give you some examples, because this is important context for Elisa's story. In 1947, Elizabeth Short, you might know her as the Black Dahlia, was allegedly seen at the Cecil Hotel bar just days before her brutal murder. Her case remains unsolved to this day. In 1964, a woman named Goldie Osgood was raped, stabbed, and murdered in her room at the Cecil. Her killer was never found. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, there were multiple suicides at the hotel. People jumping from windows. People found dead in their rooms. In one particularly horrific incident, someone jumped and landed on a pedestrian walking below, killing them both instantly. In 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was staying at the Cecil while he was terrorizing Los Angeles, killing 13 people. He'd come back to his room at the Cecil after committing murders, covered in blood, and no one even noticed because, well, that wasn't unusual behavior for the Cecil. In the 1990s, another serial killer named Jack Unterweger stayed at the Cecil. He was an Austrian journalist writing about crime in LA, but he was actually murdering sex workers during his stay. According to Amy Price, who was the general manager of the Cecil for years, there were thousands of 911 calls in the 10 years she worked there. Thousands. Police would respond to 1 to 3 calls per day from that hotel alone. Hell on earth. That's how one detective described the Cecil Hotel. People trying to set the hallways on fire. Domestic abuse. Stabbings. Someone slashing their own throat with a razor in the lobby. A former resident said, "If you didn't watch yourself, you might be flying out the window without wings." So that's the Cecil Hotel. A place where death and violence were tragically common. By 2007, the hotel tried to rebrand. They renovated part of the building and created a hostel-style section called Stay on Main. Cheaper rooms for budget travelers, backpackers, tourists. The idea was to attract a different crowd while still maintaining the low-income housing side of the building. It's this rebranded section, Stay on Main, where Elisa Lam would book her room in January 2013. Let me tell you about Elisa. Elisa Lam was born in Vancouver, British Columbia, on April 30, 1991. Her parents, David and Yina Lam, were immigrants from Hong Kong who worked incredibly hard to give their daughter a good life. Elisa was smart. Creative. She studied at the University of British Columbia. She had dreams and ambitions. But Elisa also struggled. In 2010, when she was about 19 years old, she started a blog called Ether Fields on Blogspot. And in that blog, Elisa was remarkably open about her mental health struggles. She wrote about her battle with depression and bipolar disorder. She wrote about feeling lost, directionless, like she didn't fit anywhere. In one post from January 2012, Elisa wrote about having a relapse at the start of the school term that forced her to drop several classes. She said she felt so utterly directionless and lost. Elisa was on medication to manage her bipolar disorder, multiple medications, actually. Antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics. When she took them consistently, she functioned well. But bipolar disorder is complicated. Sometimes people stop taking their meds because they don't like the side effects. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes, during a manic episode, they might believe they don't need them anymore. This becomes really important later. Despite her struggles, Elisa was determined to live her life. And in January 2013, she decided to take a solo trip. A West Coast adventure. She planned to travel from Vancouver down through California, stopping in San Diego, Los Angeles, and eventually Santa Cruz. Her parents were worried. A young woman, traveling alone, dealing with mental health challenges? But Elisa was 21 years old. She was an adult. And she really wanted to do this. So they made a compromise. Elisa would call them every single day to check in and let them know she was okay. On January 26, 2013, Elisa took an Amtrak train from San Diego to Los Angeles. She was in good spirits. She posted photos on social media. She was documenting her journey. And she needed a place to stay in LA. So she looked for budget accommodations and found the stay on main section of the Cecil Hotel. It was cheap, perfect for a student traveler on a budget. And it was downtown, convenient for sightseeing. Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28, 2013. At first, she was placed in a shared room with other female travelers. But almost immediately, there were problems. Elisa's roommates complained about her behavior. They said she was acting strangely. According to the hotel manager, Amy Price, Elisa was leaving handwritten notes on her roommates' beds, notes that said things like "go home" and "go away." She would lock the room door and require a password for entry. She was making her roommates uncomfortable. So after just 2 days, the hotel moved Elisa to a private room on the 5th floor. Room 506. But her odd behavior continued. A few days before she disappeared, Elisa attended a live taping of the show Conan in Burbank. She was excited about it, it was part of her LA adventure. But according to reports, security had to escort Elisa out of the studio because she was being disruptive. Back at the hotel, Amy Price witnessed Elisa having an outburst in the lobby. Elisa announced loudly that she was crazy. Looking back, these were all signs. Warning signs that Elisa was not doing well. That something was off. But at the time, nobody realized just how serious things were getting. Elisa was still checking in with her parents every day by phone. And according to them, she sounded okay. Maybe a little off, but okay. On January 31, 2013, Elisa was supposed to check out of the Cecil Hotel and continue her trip to Santa Cruz. But she never checked out. And that day, January 31st, was the last day her parents heard from her. When Elisa's parents didn't hear from her on January 31st, they immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. She'd been checking in every single day without fail. They tried calling her. No answer. They tried again and again. Nothing. On February 1st, David and Yina Lam contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to report their daughter missing. The LAPD began investigating immediately. Officers went to the Cecil Hotel and searched Elisa's room, room 506. And here's what they found: everything. All of Elisa's belongings were still there. Her luggage. Her laptop. Her wallet. Her identification. And most importantly, her medication. If Elisa had left on her own, why would she leave without any of these things? No money, no ID, no medication? That made no sense. Police brought in search dogs and began searching the hotel, floor by floor. They walked the dogs through every hallway, checked the common areas, even went up to the roof. But the dogs couldn't pick up Elisa's scent anywhere outside her room. They searched the streets around the hotel. They canvassed Skid Row. They talked to people who lived in the area, asking if anyone had seen a young Asian woman with long dark hair. Nothing. Elisa Lam had simply vanished. By February 6, almost a week after Elisa was last seen, the LAPD realized they needed more help. They created missing person flyers with Elisa's photo and posted them all around downtown LA and online. The case started getting media attention. A missing tourist. A young woman. Disappeared from a hotel with a dark history. The story had all the elements that capture public interest. But the investigation was going nowhere. No witnesses. No leads. No clues. And then, on February 13, 2013, the LAPD made a decision that would change everything. they decided to release security camera footage from inside the Cecil Hotel. It was footage from one of the hotel's elevators, timestamped January 31st, the last day Elisa was seen alive. The video is just under 3 minutes long. And when the LAPD released it to the public, asking for help identifying Elisa's behavior or any information about her whereabouts, they had no idea it was about to become one of the most viral videos on the internet. Let me describe what happens in that elevator footage, because even now, years later, it's deeply unsettling to watch. The video starts with Elisa entering the elevator. She's wearing a red hoodie, black pants, and sandals. She walks in and immediately starts pressing multiple buttons on the panel. Like, a lot of buttons. She's hitting them rapidly, seemingly pressing buttons for several different floors. Then she steps back into the corner of the elevator and waits. But the elevator doors don't close. They just stay open. After a moment, Elisa peeks her head out of the elevator, looking left and then right down the hallway, as if she's checking to see if someone is there. She steps back inside the elevator and presses herself against the wall, like she's trying to hide. Then she jumps out of the elevator again and stands just outside the doors, pressing more buttons. She's looking around nervously. And then, this is the part that really got people's attention. Elisa steps back inside the elevator and starts making these strange hand gestures. She's moving her hands and arms in these odd, flowing motions. Almost like she's conducting music or performing some kind of ritual. She's talking, too, you can see her mouth moving, but there's no audio on the security footage, so we don't know what she's saying. She steps outside the elevator again. She stands there for a moment, seemingly waiting. And then she walks off to the left, out of frame. The elevator doors finally close, but they don't close until she's been gone for a while. That's the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive. When this video hit the internet, it exploded. Millions of people watched it. And everyone had theories. Some people said, she's clearly being followed. She's hiding from someone. They pointed to the way she peeked around the corner, the way she pressed herself against the wall. Others said, something paranormal is happening. They thought her hand movements looked like she was interacting with something invisible. Some people claimed the video's timestamp had been edited, that portions were missing. Internet sleuths started dissecting every frame of the video. They analyzed her body language. They compared her movements to symptoms of various mental health conditions. They looked for reflections in the elevator's metal panels to see if someone else was there. A few people pointed out similarities to a horror movie from 2005 called Dark Water, where a character experiences strange occurrences involving water and ends up dead in a water tank. The parallels were eerie. And then there were people who noticed that Elisa's hand gestures looked similar to a game that was popular in South Korea called the elevator game. It's this urban legend ritual where you're supposed to press elevator buttons in a specific sequence to supposedly access another dimension or summon spirits. Some people theorized that Elisa was playing this game. The theories just kept coming. Conspiracy theories. Ghost theories. Murder theories. But what nobody realized at the time, what the police didn't share with the public, was that there was a much simpler explanation for some of Elisa's behavior in that elevator. When investigators and later, YouTubers and documentary filmmakers, actually went to the Cecil Hotel and examined those elevators, they discovered something important. Elisa had accidentally pressed the door hold button. The door hold button keeps elevator doors open for 2 minutes. That's why the doors didn't close. It wasn't paranormal. It wasn't someone controlling the elevator remotely. Elisa had just pressed the wrong button. But still, that doesn't explain everything else in the video. Her nervous behavior. The way she kept looking around. Those strange hand movements. As the video went viral and theories spread like wildfire, Elisa's family was desperately hoping someone would recognize her and provide a tip that would bring her home safely. But as the days continued to pass with no sign of Elisa, hope was fading fast. By mid-February, it had been more than 2 weeks since anyone had seen Elisa Lam. The police investigation was stalled. They'd searched the hotel multiple times. They'd interviewed staff and guests. They'd reviewed all available security footage. But there was nothing. And then, on February 19, 2013, guests at the Cecil Hotel started complaining about the water. People said the water pressure was really low. Some said the water coming out of their taps looked discolored, brownish. Others reported that the water had a weird taste and smell. Several guests refused to shower or brush their teeth with the hotel water. The hotel's maintenance staff knew they had to investigate. Water issues like this usually mean there's a problem with the pipes or the main water supply. So a maintenance worker went up to the roof of the Cecil Hotel. On the roof, there were 4 large water tanks, massive cylindrical tanks that held the building's water supply. Each tank was about 10 feet tall and held thousands of gallons of water. The maintenance worker climbed a ladder to the top of one of the tanks and opened the heavy lid to check inside. And that's when he saw her. Elisa Lam's body was floating in the water tank. She was naked. Her clothes, that red hoodie, the black pants, her underwear, her watch, her room key, were all floating in the water near her body. But her cell phone was never found. The LAPD was called immediately. This was now a death investigation, possibly a homicide. The scene was complicated. Getting Elisa's body out of the water tank wasn't easy. They eventually had to drain the tank and cut a hole in the side to remove her remains. The coroner's office transported Elisa's body for autopsy. Her family was notified. After weeks of desperate searching and hoping, they now knew the worst had happened. Their daughter was dead. But how did she die? And more importantly, how did she end up in that water tank? Let me walk you through just how difficult it would have been for Elisa, or anyone, to access those water tanks, because this is where the case gets really confusing. First, to get to the roof of the Cecil Hotel, you have to go through a door that's supposed to be locked and alarmed. Hotel staff have keys, but guests shouldn't be able to access it. If someone opened that door, an alarm should have sounded. The hotel manager, Amy Price, said that alarm never went off. But it's possible the alarm was malfunctioning or had been disabled. There was also a fire escape on the side of the building that led to the roof. But using the fire escape would require climbing multiple stories on the outside of the building. Once you're on the roof, you have to get to the water tank platform. The tanks sit on a raised platform, so you have to climb up onto that platform first. Then, you have to climb a 10-foot ladder that's attached to the side of one of the water tanks. At the top of the tank, there's a heavy lid. Very heavy. One investigator said you need both hands and significant force to open it. It's not something you'd casually lift open. And once the lid is open, you'd have to lower yourself inside. The opening isn't huge, maybe 2 or 3 feet across. So for Elisa to have gotten into that water tank on her own, she would have had to get to the roof, through a locked door or up a fire escape. Climb onto the water tank platform. Climb a 10-foot ladder. Open a heavy lid with both hands. Lower herself inside. At some point, remove all her clothes. That's a lot of steps. And here's another thing, when Elisa's body was found, the lid was closed. If she had climbed in on her own, how did the lid close behind her? These questions made investigators initially suspect foul play. Had someone forced Elisa onto the roof? Had someone killed her and put her body in the tank to hide it? But as they continued investigating, another picture started to emerge. The autopsy of Elisa Lam was performed on February 21, 2013, 2 days after her body was discovered. The initial results were inconclusive. There was no evidence of physical trauma. No signs that she'd been beaten or stabbed or shot. No defensive wounds on her hands that would suggest she'd fought off an attacker. There was no evidence of sexual assault. But determining exactly how and why Elisa died was complicated by the fact that her body had been submerged in water for at least 2 weeks. Decomposition had occurred. That makes it harder to detect certain causes of death. The big question, did Elisa drown? And if so, was it an accident, suicide, or homicide? Drowning can be really difficult to prove in an autopsy, especially after this much time had passed. There wasn't conclusive physical evidence of drowning in the traditional sense, but the circumstances strongly suggested it. And then there was the toxicology report. When the toxicology results came back, they showed that Elisa had several medications in her system, but not all of them. Specifically, she had taken her antidepressant that day, likely Wellbutrin. She had not taken her mood stabilizer, Lamictal, that day or recently. She had not taken her antipsychotic medication, likely Seroquel or similar, in the days leading up to her death. This is really, really important. For someone with bipolar disorder, missing doses of mood stabilizers and antipsychotics can trigger manic episodes. And manic episodes can cause racing thoughts, paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, impulsive behavior, lack of judgment about danger, psychosis. Elisa's family later revealed something to investigators that the police didn't share with the public at the time. Elisa had a history of not taking her medications. And when she stopped taking them, she would have episodes where she experienced hallucinations and would hide, sometimes under her bed, because she believed she was in danger. She had been hospitalized at least once before for similar episodes. This information completely reframed the elevator video. What looked like someone being followed or scared of an actual person could have been someone experiencing paranoid delusions. Elisa might have believed someone was chasing her when nobody was actually there. Her erratic hand movements, her nervous peeking around corners, her strange behavior with the roommates leaving those go-home notes, all of it was consistent with a bipolar manic episode with psychotic features. In the documentary about Elisa's case, forensic pathologist Dr. Jason Tovar explains that the autopsy results were ultimately inconclusive about the exact manner of death. But combined with the toxicology results and Elisa's medical history, a picture emerged. Elisa was likely in the midst of a severe manic episode, possibly experiencing hallucinations and paranoia. In that state, she may have believed she needed to hide. She somehow made it to the roof, possibly through an unlocked door or maybe up the fire escape because she was in a state of panic. She climbed into the water tank, possibly believing she was hiding from danger that wasn't real. Once inside, the water was cold, very cold. Hypothermia can set in quickly. Combined with exhaustion and confusion from her mental state, Elisa eventually drowned. As for how the lid closed? Investigators believe that either the lid fell closed on its own, it was on hinges and could swing shut. Elisa pulled it closed behind her while trying to hide. It was never fully closed to begin with and appeared closed from a distance. On June 20, 2013, 4 months after Elisa's body was found, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office issued their final ruling. Manner of death, accident cause of death, drowning contributing factor, bipolar disorder. But even with this official ruling, not everyone was satisfied. After the coroner's ruling, the case was officially closed. But for millions of people on the internet, the case was far from over. The theories kept coming. YouTube videos analyzing every frame of the elevator footage. Blogs dedicated to solving Elisa's death. Reddit threads with thousands of comments debating what really happened. Some people absolutely refused to accept that Elisa's death was accidental. They insisted there was a cover-up, that the police had missed something, that someone had murdered her and gotten away with it. And as often happens with viral true crime cases, people started looking for suspects. One person who became a target of internet sleuths was a musician who went by the stage name Morbid, real name Pablo Vergara. He was a death metal artist who happened to be staying at or near the Cecil Hotel around the time of Elisa's disappearance. A few days before Elisa went missing, Morbid had uploaded a music video to YouTube. The video was for a song called Died in Pain, and it featured imagery of a woman being chased through a forest to her death. Internet detectives saw this and immediately thought, this is suspicious. This is too much of a coincidence. He must be involved. They started flooding his social media accounts with accusations, death threats, demands that he confess. They got his YouTube account shut down, his email, his Facebook page. The harassment was relentless, and it nearly destroyed him. Morbid appeared in the Netflix documentary about Elisa's case, and he revealed that the online harassment drove him to contemplate suicide. He was innocent. He was actually in Mexico at the time Elisa died, and police confirmed this, but that didn't stop people from attacking him. This is one of the darkest sides of true crime obsession. When people become so convinced they can solve a case that they're willing to harass and threaten innocent people based on coincidences or hunches. Journalist Josh Dean, who also appears in the documentary, said something really important. People who cared about Elisa and knew her and loved her look at the case very differently. For them, it's hell. It's traumatic. It's not a game. It's not a puzzle. It's an indelible catastrophe. Elisa Lam wasn't a character in a mystery novel. She was a real person. A daughter. A student. Someone who struggled with mental illness and was trying to live her life despite those struggles. And her death wasn't a conspiracy or a supernatural occurrence. It was a tragedy. A young woman who wasn't taking her medication consistently, who had a mental health crisis while traveling alone, and who died in a horrible accident that could have been prevented if she'd had proper support and medical care. After Elisa's death, her parents filed a lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel, arguing that the hotel had been negligent, that the rooftop access should have been more secure, that they should have noticed Elisa's deteriorating mental state, that they should have done more to protect their guests. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed in 2015. The Cecil Hotel itself closed to hotel guests in 2017 for renovations. As of 2021, it had been converted into low-income housing. Elisa Lam's case became the subject of that Netflix documentary in 2021, Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel. The four-part series explores not just Elisa's death, but the history of the hotel, the impact of internet sleuthing, and the way true crime content can sometimes do more harm than good. So what's the truth about Elisa Lam? The truth is this. A young woman with bipolar disorder, who was not consistently taking her medication, experienced a severe manic episode while traveling alone. In that state, she likely experienced delusions and paranoia that led her to climb into a water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. And there, scared and confused and alone, she drowned. It's not a satisfying ending. It's not mysterious or supernatural or conspiratorial. It's just incredibly sad. Elisa Lam deserved better. She deserved access to consistent mental health care. She deserved support while traveling. She deserved to be remembered for who she was, a thoughtful, creative young woman who loved fashion and writing and was trying to figure out her place in the world, not just as the subject of an infamous elevator video. And her family deserved privacy in their grief, not millions of strangers speculating about their daughter's death online. This case is a reminder that mental illness is serious. That bipolar disorder can be life-threatening when not properly managed. And that sometimes, tragic accidents happen not because of evil or conspiracy, but because someone was sick and didn't get the help they needed in time. If you or someone you love is struggling with mental illness, please reach out for help. Talk to a doctor. Call a crisis line. Don't try to manage it alone. And if you're interested in true crime, remember that these are real people's stories. Real families. Real grief. Approach these cases with empathy and respect, not as puzzles to be solved or entertainment to be consumed. Rest in peace, Elisa Lam. I hope you found the peace that was so hard for you to find in life. Thanks for listening tonight, friends. Sleep well. Subscribe for more updates.